A Millionaire's Secret, How Love and Forgiveness Rebuilt a Broken Family. In a grand mansion on the outskirts of the city, Michael Carter, a wealthy millionaire, lives a life of solitude. To outsiders, his life might seem perfect, luxury, status, and success, but behind closed doors, his heart carries a heavy burden. After the tragic death of his beloved wife, Emily, the light in Michael's life dimmed. His 7-year-old son, Ethan, suffers from a rare autoimmune disease, leaving the boy physically weak and emotionally isolated. Consumed by grief, Michael buries himself in work, leaving Ethan to battle loneliness in the cold, silent halls of the Carter mansion. Caregivers come and go, unable to fill the emotional void that suffocates Ethan. Just when it seems that hope is lost, Grace, a young nurse with a warm smile and unwavering compassion, steps into their lives. But Grace brings more than comfort, she carries a secret that could shatter the fragile balance in the Carter household. Who is she, and what connection does she have to Michael's past? As the truth unfolds, Michael is forced to confront a shocking revelation that could redefine everything he knows about love, family, and forgiveness. Will the millionaire's guarded heart finally open, or will the weight of the past keep him trapped in loneliness? Stay tuned to uncover the twists and turns of this poignant story. The sprawling Carter mansion stood at the edge of a quiet town, its grandeur unmatched yet cloaked in an eerie silence. Towering oak trees lined the driveway, their shadows creeping across the gravel as if whispering secrets of the past. The once vibrant garden, with its roses and lilies, now lay overgrown and neglected, reflecting the somber mood within. Inside the mansion, Michael Carter sat alone in his study, surrounded by towering shelves of unread books. His sharp, chiseled features bore the weight of exhaustion, his dark eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. His tailored suit, while immaculate, did little to conceal the air of loneliness that hung around him. The ticking of the antique clock on the wall was the only sound in the room, a cruel reminder of time slipping by. Michael, a millionaire with an empire spanning multiple industries, was envied by many. But behind the closed doors of his opulent home, he lived a life of isolation. Since the death of his wife Emily 2 years ago, he had buried himself in work, hoping to numb the pain of her absence. Yet, no amount of success could fill the void she left behind. "Daddy, can I come in?" A timid voice broke through the silence. Michael turned to see his 7-year-old son, Ethan, standing hesitantly at the doorway. The boy was pale, his small frame frail from battling a rare autoimmune disease. His oversized sweater hung loosely on his shoulders, and his brown eyes, once bright, now carried a weight of sadness far beyond his years. Michael forced a smile. "Of course, Ethan. What's wrong?" Ethan shuffled into the room, clutching a stuffed bear that had seen better days. "Nothing's wrong. I just wanted to sit with you." Michael hesitated, glancing at the stack of papers on his desk. "I'm a little busy right now, buddy. Maybe later." Ethan's face fell, but he nodded. "Okay." He turned and walked out, his small footsteps echoing down the hall. Michael sighed heavily, running a hand through his graying hair. He knew he was failing Ethan, but he didn't know how to bridge the gap between them. Grief had created a chasm he was too afraid to cross. Ethan retreated to his room, a space filled with books, puzzles, and a collection of toy trains that once brought him joy. He climbed onto his bed, curling up with his stuffed bear. Outside his window, the sun was setting, casting long shadows on the walls. The house felt too big, too empty, and Ethan longed for the warmth and laughter that used to fill it when his mother was alive. The only company Ethan had was a revolving door of caretakers, nurses hired by Michael to tend to his medical needs. But none of them stayed long. They followed the rules, administered medications, and prepared meals, but they couldn't fill the emotional void in Ethan's life. He missed the bedtime stories, the gentle hugs, and the way his mother's laughter used to echo through the halls. That evening, as the house settled into its usual silence, Ethan whispered to his bear, "I wish someone would make Daddy smile again. And maybe play trains with me." The next morning brought a knock on the door, a sound that echoed through the cavernous mansion. Elena, the housekeeper, answered it. Standing on the doorstep was a young woman, her face bright despite the chilly autumn air. "Good morning," she said, her voice warm. "I'm Grace. I'm here for the nursing position." Elena raised an eyebrow. "You're younger than I expected," she said, opening the door to let her in. Grace stepped inside, taking in the grandeur of the mansion with wide eyes. The marble floors gleamed, and the chandelier above sparkled like a cascade of diamonds. Yet, there was an undeniable heaviness in the air, as though the walls carried the weight of sorrow. "I may be young," Grace said with a polite smile, "but I'm experienced. And I'm good with children." Elena gave her a once-over before nodding. "Follow me. Mr. Carter will interview you." Michael sat in the living room, his expression unreadable as Grace entered. She was in her mid-20s, with wavy auburn hair that framed her kind face. Her eyes, a soft green, held a determination that intrigued him. She wore a simple blouse and slacks, her demeanor professional yet approachable. "Mr. Carter," Grace began, extending a hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you. I understand you're looking for someone to care for Ethan." Michael shook her hand briefly, then gestured for her to sit. "This job isn't easy," he said bluntly. "Ethan has specific medical needs, and," he hesitated, glancing toward the staircase. "He's been through a lot." "I understand," Grace said sincerely. "I've worked with children facing similar challenges. More than anything, they need patience and someone who truly listens." Michael studied her for a moment, his skepticism evident. "We've had other nurses. None have stayed." "I'm not like the others," Grace replied confidently. "I'm here to help Ethan, not just take care of his symptoms." Her words lingered in the air, and for a moment, Michael saw a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Reluctantly, he nodded. "You'll start tomorrow." That evening, Ethan watched from his bedroom window as the last light faded from the sky. He didn't know it yet, but his life was about to change in ways he could never imagine. Grace's arrival was the first ray of sunshine piercing through the clouds that had long overshadowed the Carter mansion. In her wake, she carried not only the skills of a caretaker but also a warmth that could melt the frostiest of hearts. And though Michael couldn't see it yet, she might just be the bridge he needed to reconnect with his son, and with himself. The next morning, the Carter mansion was quieter than usual. Michael had already left for work, as he often did at dawn, leaving the house to its usual stillness. Ethan sat in the kitchen, his hands wrapped around a warm mug of cocoa, staring at the swirls on the surface. Elena, the housekeeper, hummed softly as she tidied up, her movements methodical. The silence was broken by the sound of the front door opening. Grace stepped inside, carrying a bright smile that seemed to chase away the mansion's shadows. Her auburn hair caught the sunlight streaming through the windows, and her green eyes sparkled with determination. "Good morning, Ethan," she greeted, her voice cheerful but gentle. "I'm Grace. Your dad said I'll be helping take care of you." Ethan glanced at her shyly, clutching his mug a little tighter. He had seen many caregivers come and go, each one distant and clinical, never staying long enough to leave an impression. Grace, however, was different. There was something about her presence that felt warm. "Hi," he murmured, his voice barely audible. Grace didn't press him further. Instead, she crouched to his eye level, her smile unwavering. "You know, I brought something with me that I think you might like." From her bag, she pulled out a small wooden puzzle box. "It's a gift. My dad made this for me when I was little. It's a bit tricky, but I thought you might enjoy figuring it out." Ethan's eyes lit up with curiosity as he took the box. His fingers traced the intricate carvings, and for the first time in what felt like ages, a small smile appeared on his face. Over the next few days, Grace worked tirelessly to make a connection with Ethan. She didn't push him to talk or force him into activities. Instead, she observed him carefully, learning his routines and interests. She noticed how he loved his train set, spending hours arranging the tracks in elaborate patterns. She also saw how he would peek out the window at the garden but never venture outside. One afternoon, as Ethan played with his trains in the living room, Grace sat on the floor nearby, organizing a set of paints she had brought. "You know, Ethan," she said casually, "I used to love painting when I was your age. My mom and I would sit outside and paint the garden." Ethan glanced at her, intrigued. "What did you paint?" "Mostly flowers," Grace said with a chuckle. "But sometimes, I'd paint silly things, like a train with wings or a bear wearing glasses." Ethan giggled softly. "A bear with glasses? That's funny." Grace's heart swelled at the sound of his laughter. "Maybe we can paint together sometime. What do you think?" Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "Maybe." Grace's influence extended beyond her time with Ethan. The once lifeless mansion began to feel different. She opened the heavy curtains to let in sunlight, arranged fresh flowers in the vases, and played soft music as she worked. Her presence was like a breath of fresh air, bringing life to a house that had long been steeped in sorrow. Even Elena, who had grown used to the mansion's somber atmosphere, noticed the change. "You have a way with that boy," she remarked one morning as Grace prepared Ethan's breakfast. "I haven't seen him smile like that in years." Grace smiled. "Ethan just needs someone to remind him that he's not alone. He's a wonderful kid." Elena nodded, her eyes softening. "You're good for him. And maybe, just maybe, you'll be good for Mr. Carter too." Michael, however, remained distant. While he noticed the positive changes in Ethan, he kept his interactions with Grace brief and professional. He wasn't ready to let someone new into his life, not after the loss of Emily. One evening, Michael returned home earlier than usual. As he walked through the front door, he was greeted by the sound of laughter, a sound he hadn't heard in the house since Emily's passing. Following the noise, he found Ethan and Grace in the living room. Ethan was showing her his train set, explaining how he had created a bridge using spare pieces. Grace listened intently, her encouragement genuine. Michael stood in the doorway, watching the scene unfold. For a moment, he felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name, jealousy, perhaps, or maybe regret. He realized how much he had distanced himself from his own son. Grace noticed him standing there and smiled. "Hi, Mr. Carter. Ethan was just showing me his amazing train track. You should see it, it's like a masterpiece." Ethan looked up at his father, his face glowing with excitement. "Dad, do you want to see?" Michael hesitated, then stepped into the room. "Sure, buddy. Show me." For the next few minutes, Ethan excitedly explained his creation, and Michael listened, his heart heavy with guilt for how much he had missed. Grace watched quietly, giving father and son the space they needed. That night, as Grace tidied up Ethan's room after tucking him in, she found herself standing by the window, looking out at the garden. The moonlight cast a silvery glow over the overgrown bushes and wilting flowers. "You're making a difference, you know," Elena said from the doorway. Grace turned, startled. "I'm just doing my job." Elena shook her head. "It's more than that. Ethan is happier, and even Mr. Carter, he's starting to soften. This house hasn't felt like a home in a long time. You've brought something back." Grace smiled, her resolve strengthening. "Ethan deserves happiness. And maybe Michael does too. I'll do whatever it takes to help them." Over the weeks, Grace's presence became a constant in Ethan's life. He laughed more, played more, and even began asking about the garden outside. Grace encouraged him to take small steps, like sitting by the open window or walking to the balcony. Slowly but surely, the little boy who had been trapped in loneliness began to rediscover the joys of childhood. For Michael, the changes in Ethan were undeniable. He found himself lingering at home a little longer each morning, just to hear his son's laughter. Grace's warmth was breaking through the walls he had built around his heart, though he wasn't ready to admit it. But Grace's story was more complex than anyone in the Carter mansion knew. She carried a secret, one that would soon unravel everything. For now, she focused on the light she was bringing to Ethan's life, unaware of the storm that lay ahead. The Carter mansion was alive in a way it hadn't been for years. Ethan's laughter echoed down the halls, and even the once somber Michael seemed to be lingering at home more often, silently watching the bond between his son and Grace grow stronger. However, Grace carried a secret, a burden she hadn't intended to reveal, but one she could no longer ignore. One quiet afternoon, Grace was organizing Ethan's playroom when she noticed a box tucked away in the corner. Its lid was slightly ajar, revealing old photo albums. She hesitated before pulling the box closer, curiosity getting the better of her. As she flipped through the pages, she came across a photograph that made her heart stop. It was a picture of Emily Carter, her warm smile radiant as she held a newborn in her arms. Grace's hand trembled as she traced the photo with her fingers. There was something hauntingly familiar about Emily's face. The same auburn hair, the same gentle green eyes, features that Grace had seen every day in her own reflection. The room seemed to tilt as a memory surfaced, her adoptive mother's voice, soft and distant. "Your birth mother was kind and loving. I'm sure she would have wanted you to know that." Grace's heart raced as realization dawned. Could Emily Carter be her biological mother? That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Grace found herself standing in Michael's study. The air was heavy with the scent of old books and polished wood. Michael looked up from his desk, his brow furrowing at her expression. "Grace, is something wrong?" he asked, setting down his pen. She took a deep breath, clutching the photograph in her hand. "Mr. Carter, I need to tell you something. I think Emily might be my birth mother." The room fell into an uneasy silence. Michael's face hardened, his eyes narrowing. "What are you talking about?" Grace placed the photo on his desk. "I found this in Ethan's playroom. Emily looks exactly like the woman my adoptive mother described to me. I've always known I was adopted, but I never had any details, until now." Michael's jaw tightened as he rose from his chair. "Are you saying you came here with this story to get closer to my family? To Ethan?" "No." Grace protested, her voice firm but pleading. "I didn't even know until today. I swear, I took this job because I wanted to help Ethan. But now, I need to know the truth." Michael's gaze was icy, his voice cutting. "The truth? The truth is that my wife never mentioned you. If what you're saying is true, why wouldn't she tell me?" Grace hesitated, her heart sinking under his words. "I don't know. But I'm not lying. Please, Mr. Carter, I'm not trying to hurt anyone. I just want to understand." Michael turned away, his shoulders stiff with tension. "You should leave, Grace." Her throat tightened, but she refused to back down. "I'm not leaving. Not until I find out if Emily was my mother, and if Ethan is my brother." Over the next few days, Michael became distant, retreating into his work. Grace continued caring for Ethan, though her mind was consumed with doubt and questions. One evening, as she tucked Ethan into bed, he looked up at her with wide eyes. "Grace?" he asked softly. "Yes, Ethan," she replied, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Are you going to leave like the others?" he asked, his voice trembling. Grace's heart ached at his words. She crouched beside him, meeting his gaze. "No, Ethan. I'm not leaving. I promise." "Good," he whispered, clutching her hand. "Because you're the only one who makes the house feel happy again." Grace pressed a kiss to his forehead, her resolve strengthening. Whatever the truth was, she owed it to Ethan, and to herself, to find out. Michael, despite his initial anger, found himself unable to ignore Grace's claim. Late one night, he sat alone in his study, staring at Emily's old journal. He had avoided reading it after her death, unable to face the memories within. But now, he opened it with trembling hands, flipping through its pages. Amid the loving notes about their life together, he found an entry that stopped him cold. "There's something I've never told Michael. Something I'm not proud of, but something I thought was best. Before I met him, I had a daughter. I was young, scared, and couldn't keep her. I pray she's happy wherever she is." Michael's hands tightened around the journal. Grace's claim wasn't just plausible, it was likely true. Emily had kept this secret from him, and now the woman he had pushed away might very well be his stepdaughter. The next morning, Michael found Grace in the garden, tending to the overgrown flowers with a quiet determination. The crisp morning air carried the scent of dew and earth. "Grace," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. She turned, surprised to see him. "Mr. Carter." He held up the journal. "I found something. Something that makes me think you might be telling the truth." Her breath hitched as she stepped closer. "You believe me?" "I believe it's possible," Michael admitted, his expression conflicted. "But I need proof. Do you have anything that could confirm this?" Grace nodded, pulling a folded piece of paper from her pocket. "This is my birth certificate. My adoptive mother gave it to me before she passed. It lists my mother as Emily Carter." Michael stared at the document, his mind reeling. The name was there, clear as day. Emily had indeed been Grace's mother. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Michael's voice broke the silence. "If this is true, then Ethan. Ethan is your brother." Grace nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "I don't want anything from you, Mr. Carter. I just want to be a part of Ethan's life. He deserves to know he has someone who loves him." Michael looked at her, his defenses crumbling. For the first time, he saw not an intruder, but a young woman searching for her family. "Let me think," he said quietly. "This changes everything." As Grace watched him walk back toward the mansion, she felt a mix of hope and fear. The truth was out, but what it would mean for her, Ethan, and Michael remained uncertain. One thing was clear, the Carter family's journey was only just beginning. The Carter mansion felt heavy with unspoken words in the days that followed. Michael was quiet, retreating to his study, while Grace continued to care for Ethan, trying to keep life as normal as possible for the boy. But underneath her calm exterior, her mind raced. Now that Michael knew the truth, what would he do? Would he accept her as part of their family, or would he push her away? One evening, as the last rays of sunlight filtered through the mansion's tall windows, Michael finally broke the silence. He called Grace into the living room, where he sat on the edge of the grand leather sofa, Emily's journal in his hands. His face was pale, his expression unreadable. Grace entered hesitantly, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Carter?" Michael looked up at her, his gaze steady but tinged with sadness. "Sit down, Grace. We need to talk." She perched on the edge of an armchair, her heart pounding. Michael held up the journal. "Emily wrote about you. Not directly, but enough to confirm what you said. She mentioned a daughter she had before we met, a daughter she gave up for adoption." Grace's breath caught. Even though she had suspected the truth, hearing it from Michael felt overwhelming. "So, she really was my mother." Michael nodded, his grip tightening on the journal. "It seems so. But Grace, I need to ask, why now? Why did you take this job?" Grace met his gaze, her voice firm. "I didn't know, not at first. I applied for the job because I wanted to help Ethan. It wasn't until I saw her picture that I realized the connection. I promise, I never meant to disrupt your life." Michael studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "It's not just my life you've disrupted. This changes everything, for me, for Ethan, for all of us." Later that night, Michael sat alone in the study, staring out the window at the darkened garden. He couldn't deny the truth any longer. Grace wasn't just a stranger who had stumbled into their lives, she was Emily's daughter, his late wife's secret, and Ethan's sister. His emotions churned, a storm of betrayal, anger, and sorrow. Why hadn't Emily told him? Why had she kept this from him, from their family? He felt as though the foundation of his life had been shaken, leaving him unsure of where to stand. But then he thought of Grace, her warmth, her kindness, the way Ethan's face lit up when she was around. She hadn't come seeking money or status, she had come seeking a connection, a family. And despite everything, he couldn't deny that she had brought light back into their lives. The next morning, Michael asked Ethan to join him in the garden. The boy looked up curiously as his father knelt beside him, a rare softness in his expression. "Ethan," Michael began gently, "I need to tell you something. It's about Grace." Ethan tilted his head. "What about her?" Michael hesitated, then took a deep breath. She's your sister. She's Emily's daughter." Ethan's eyes widened, and for a moment, he was silent. Then, to Michael's surprise, he smiled. "I knew it." Michael blinked. "You knew?" Ethan nodded, pulling a small notebook from his pocket. "I read her journal once. She wrote about how much she wanted to find her family. I didn't say anything because I didn't think you'd believe me." Michael stared at his son, both stunned and moved by his quiet wisdom. "And you're okay with this?" Ethan nodded again, his smile growing. "I always wanted a sister. Can she stay with us, Dad? Please?" Michael's heart ached at the simplicity of Ethan's request. He realized that, for all his doubts and fears, the decision wasn't about him, it was about the family he had left and the future they could build together. That evening, Michael called Grace into the study again. This time, his tone was softer, his demeanor less guarded. "Grace," he began, "I've made my decision. Ethan and I want you to stay. You're part of this family now." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, Mr. Carter. I promise I'll do everything I can to make this work." Michael shook his head. "No more, Mr. Carter. If you're staying, call me Michael." Grace smiled through her tears. "Thank you, Michael." The days that followed were a period of adjustment for the Carter family. Grace and Ethan grew even closer, their sibling bond blossoming with each passing day. They painted together in the garden, played with his train set, and even began planting new flowers in honor of Emily. Michael, though still reserved, began to open up. He joined Grace and Ethan for dinner, listened to their laughter, and even shared stories about Emily, stories that helped Grace piece together the mother she had never known. One evening, as the family sat together in the living room, Ethan looked up at Michael and Grace with a serious expression. "Do you think Mom would be happy?" Michael placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, his voice steady. "I think she'd be proud of all of us. She wanted us to be happy, to love each other. And I think we're finally doing that." Grace nodded, her eyes shining. "I hope so. I feel like I'm finally where I belong." As the fire crackled in the hearth and the sound of laughter filled the room, the Carter mansion, once so heavy with sorrow, felt alive again. For the first time in years, it truly felt like a home. But the journey wasn't over yet, there were still wounds to heal, memories to honor, and a future to build together. The Carter mansion, once a silent and lonely place, now brimmed with warmth and laughter. Grace's presence had transformed not just Ethan, but Michael as well. The family was beginning to heal, one day at a time. One sunny afternoon, Grace stood in the garden with Ethan, their hands covered in soil as they planted a row of vibrant tulips. Ethan giggled as Grace smeared a bit of dirt on his nose, pretending it was part of the gardening rules. "You look like a real gardener now," Grace teased, laughing. Ethan grinned and wiped his face with his sleeve. "Mom loved tulips, didn't she?" Grace paused, her smile softening. Yes, she did. And I think she'd be really happy to see us planting these together. Ethan looked up at her, his expression earnest. I'm glad you're here, Grace. I don't feel so alone anymore. Her chest tightened with emotion as she knelt down to hug him. I'm glad I'm here too, Ethan. You've given me something I've always wanted, a family. That evening, the three of them sat around the dining table for dinner, a rare moment of unity that had become more frequent since Grace's arrival. Michael looked across the table at his son and Grace, his heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and hope. Ethan, Michael began, his voice steady, I have something I want to say to both of you. Grace and Ethan turned to him, curiosity in their eyes. I've made a lot of mistakes, Michael admitted, his gaze dropping to his hands. After we lost your mom, I didn't know how to handle it. I focused on work because it was easier than facing my grief. And I know I wasn't there for you, Ethan, the way I should have been. Ethan's face softened. It's okay, Dad. You're here now. Michael's throat tightened as he continued. And Grace. I'm sorry for how I treated you when you first came here. I let my anger and confusion cloud my judgment. But you've shown me what family really means, and I'm grateful for you. Grace reached out, placing her hand over Michael's. You've given me a chance to find my family, Michael. That means everything to me. In the weeks that followed, the Carter family found new ways to bond. Michael took Ethan and Grace on small outings, something he hadn't done since Emily's passing. They visited a nearby park, where Ethan marveled at the ducks in the pond, and Grace encouraged him to take small, confident steps outside his comfort zone. Look at you. Grace cheered as Ethan walked across a wooden bridge. You're braver than you think, Ethan. Michael stood nearby, watching them with a faint smile. Grace had brought a joy back into their lives that he hadn't thought possible. As the seasons changed, so did their routines. Grace encouraged Michael to join their garden projects, and though he initially protested, he eventually found solace in the simple act of planting flowers with his children. Together, they transformed the overgrown garden into a vibrant sanctuary, filled with Emily's favorite blooms. One afternoon, as they worked together under the warm sun, Ethan looked up and said, "This feels like Mom's here with us." Grace and Michael exchanged a glance, their hearts heavy but full of love. "I think she is," Grace said softly, wiping a tear from her cheek. The turning point for their family came during Ethan's 8th birthday. Grace and Michael worked together to plan a small celebration, inviting only a few close friends and neighbors. The mansion was filled with balloons, laughter, and the smell of freshly baked cake. When it was time for Ethan to blow out the candles, he closed his eyes tightly and whispered a wish. Grace leaned over and asked, "What did you wish for?" Ethan grinned. "I wished for us to always be together." Grace's eyes filled with tears as Michael placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "That's a wish we can make come true, buddy." That night, after the guests had left and Ethan was fast asleep, Michael and Grace sat in the living room, a quiet moment shared between them. "You've changed everything, Grace," Michael said, his voice filled with sincerity. "You've given Ethan a sister and me, a chance to be a father again." Grace smiled, her heart full. "And you've given me a family. Something I thought I'd never have." Michael nodded, the faintest smile playing on his lips. "We still have a lot to learn, but I think we're getting there." As the fire crackled in the hearth and the moonlight streamed through the windows, the Carter mansion felt whole again. The walls that once echoed with silence now carried the sounds of love and laughter. Months turned into years, and the Carter family grew stronger with each passing day. Ethan's health improved under Grace's watchful care, and he blossomed into a confident, cheerful boy. Grace became an integral part of the family, not just as Ethan's caretaker but as his sister. The garden, once neglected, became a place of beauty and memories. Every flower, every tree bore a connection to Emily, a tribute to the love she had left behind. As the Carter family stood together one spring morning, admiring the blooming tulips, Ethan looked up at Michael and Grace. "I think Mom would be really proud of us." Michael placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his voice steady. "I know she would." And as they stood there, bathed in the warmth of the sun, it was clear that the Carter family had found something far more valuable than wealth, a bond built on love, forgiveness, and hope. They had become a family, not just in name but in heart. The story of Michael, Ethan, and Grace is a heartfelt journey of loss, discovery, and healing. It reminds us that even in the darkest times, the light of love and connection can guide us toward hope. Through Grace's warmth and determination, Ethan found a sister, Michael rediscovered his role as a father, and together, they rebuilt a family that had once been shattered by grief. This tale highlights powerful messages. Family is more than blood, true family is built on love, trust, and shared moments of joy and sorrow. Grace showed that bonds of the heart can be stronger than any biological ties. Healing through connection, Michael and Ethan's journey demonstrates that no matter how far we drift apart, love can bridge the distance and heal old wounds. The courage to forgive. Forgiveness is not just a gift to others but a key to freeing ourselves from the chains of the past. By forgiving Emily's secrets, Michael opened his heart to a brighter future. Hope and resilience. Even after profound loss, it's possible to rebuild and thrive, as the Carter family did, finding joy in life again. What about you? What part of this story resonated with you the most? Do you believe in the healing power of love and family? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt stories that touch the soul. Let's celebrate the power of love and connection together. See you in the next video.